Good evening. This is a follow-up to the discussion we've been having about informant consensus and looking for shared knowledge about behaviors and beliefs. And so I'm going to show you real briefly in Excel how to calculate what I call quasi-consensus using modal responses. So what we have here on the screen is we've got a respondent by question matrix. We have 20 respondents and we have 28 questions. It's a multiple choice question. The options or distractors, if you will, are given numbers 1 through 4. So there are 4 options to every question. As we see in question 1, there is some variability. Number of respondents answer 2, number say 3. So it looks like there is some difference in answering. The first thing we'll do is we'll calculate the consensus response or the modal response, which is the most frequent response. And we do that simply by clicking on the cell at the bottom of the column for question 1, and we enter the formula equals mode dot SNGL, which is the single mode. Some questions have multiple modes, and we can look at that a little bit later. And then find over all 20 responses what is the modal response. Once I've done it in that cell, then I can do the same calculation for all of the questions. And as we see here now, then the row 22 shows the modal response, the most common response to each question. Then the question is the respondent answer correct? In order to determine that, what we do is we check to see if a respondent's answer, here's respondent 1's answer is 2, the consensus or the modal response is 2. We use the statement if by typing equals if parentheses. The logical test is if this response is equal to this, the modal response. And then if the value is true, we ask it to place a 1 in that cell. If it's not true, we place a 0 in that cell. Now, like we did before, we can use the cursor to make the correction determination for all questions for that respondent by copying that formula to the cells at the base, at the bottom of each question. Now I can also change or do it for the rest of the respondents, but here I have to be careful because this is there's not an absolute address here, and I need the consensus response to always be in row 22. So I'm going to insert the $, which makes it an absolute address, and change the row to be number 22. Once I've done that, you see I can calculate the consensus response for all respondents. Now I gotta back up. I made a mistake here. Okay, so let's try this again. So now I have it for all 20 respondents. Now, for the knowledge calculation, all we do is we sum the number of 1s, because 1 indicates that the respondent 1 had the correct answer for question 1. I can sum the number of 1s over all 28 questions and divide that number by 28, and it'll give me a percentage of the questions answered correctly. I do that simply by entering the formula equals sum of this respondent's answer, and then I want to divide that by 28, and it will give me a fraction of the number of responses correct. And I sum that over all respondents, and it gives me a score for, and we can call this a quasi-consensus score because it tells you that informant 1 answered the same way as most respondents 89% of the time, while respondent individual 3 responded in the same way as the rest of the modal responses of the group, only 54% of the time. This tells us how much relative to the group each respondent knows and agrees. So in a sense, this calculation is a knowledge score. Now we'll spend more time on this using an alternative means of calculating consensus, because this only considers the sort of typical response. It doesn't actually incorporate any estimate of the reason the answer is not correct for each respondent. It might be due to guessing. We'll hear more about that in the next video. Thank you.